First of all, welcome and thank you for everyone who's joined. This is our first Centric Conversation over here in San Francisco, and it's a pleasure. So thank you very much, people like Jonathan from Arise, just helping us and supporting us to get all this together. Obviously, Eric and William as well. It's a real pleasure, and obviously Bonnie who's joined, and then everyone else who's decided to turn up for this. We really appreciate this. So. Our thing is customer experience. We see this as a big differentiator. We see this as a powerful strategy to grow your business, and this is what we focus on. We build communities around this, and we just want this to grow. Basically, we want this to grow. We want more organizations using this sort of strategy. So a bit about us. We were founded in 2019. And we advocate customer experience as a lever for business growth. And basically we build communities. So we were doing something called the Centric Conversation, where we were basically running webinars, etc., workshops, globally, basically getting people from all over the world to join, and this was good. And that's how I met the likes of Jonathan Shroyer, etc. And then actually what we did last year, we said we wanted to do more local stuff, because sometimes globally, you can't dive into specific challenges. For instance, if you're dealing with healthcare, different countries have their own challenges, etc., and it's very difficult to get to something meaningful. So we wanted to create some more local communities where we can dive a bit deeper into certain issues. So yeah, we do things like webinars, we do roundtables, we do on-site events where we go and work with and let you see what is really happening under the hood of certain organizations, and then we do workshops as well. The sort of things that we're doing. You've got the customer experience playbook, which is here. We're leading these conversations. We have our customer centricity maturity assessment, which we've got out to over 250 or maybe 270 organizations, and we've been able to produce or create a benchmark around customer centricity. We've got frameworks. We're doing a lot of voice of customer projects now, and later on this year in June we're launching our first summer school. We know that customer experience is about protecting revenue, it's about expanding revenue, it's about looking at the full customer life cycle, so the acquisition part, the retention part, and we know that it's something that not one department or one small team is going to do. It has to be company-wide involvement. So we know this is the home of customer centricity for us. The ambition is to get higher retention, higher sales, better brand ambassadors as well, and really there's key areas. I won't go too much into this because I know that this links well in with what Bonnie is going to be talking about, so I won't go into too much. But you've got the vision and strategy, you've got the innovation and improvement, so having a good process for innovating, customer communication, so that's about marketing, it's about service, it's also about customer success, underpinned by the technology and the insights. And then probably this is the part where we focus on the most, it's really the culture. So customer centric principles, it's basically like how you approach your work, as an individual on a daily basis, how do you approach, and then how do you approach work as a team, how do you approach work as an organization as a whole. This is quite fundamental in the customer experience world, as you guys will know. You've probably seen this from Jerry Angrave. We've got someone here with a CCXP badge, so I know he probably knows this already. So we're moving from random experiences. Everyone knows, no matter what business you are, you are giving off an experience, and we're trying to go from random to intentional, and obviously looking at people like, or organizations like Apple, or can I say Stripe maybe?
Yeah,
differentiated experiences. So I'll go very quick and just go straight over. This is one of our frameworks. I was going to put it up on the wall, I might do it at a later date, but yeah, we have some frameworks as well. But I want to go straight to and introduce a very special lady, a very knowledgeable lady. Her name is Bonnie. Bonnie was a customer experience director at GitHub a few years ago, and she basically built that from the ground up. So we'll hear about some of her best thinking there. And now she's head of professional services at Stripe. So we're very happy to welcome Bonnie. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name's Bonnie. I am responsible for professional services at Stripe, and I have a long history with customer experience. It is very close to my heart, and I have been lucky enough to build a customer experience function at a company called GitHub right before I joined Stripe. And I'm happy to share a few of my learnings today and learn from all of you all as well. All right. So since we're in an art gallery, I figured I could talk to you all about the art and science of a customer experience program. Mostly I just want to talk about what has been my lived experience and a few things that I have learned and picked up along the way. Okay. So I'll talk a little bit about a blueprint, like how do people get started in CX? Why does that happen? I'll talk a little bit about frameworks. Jonathan has a really fancy framework. I'll talk a little bit about action and how that's more important than strategy. And all of you practitioners will be nodding your heads. And then we'll talk a little bit about impact. So, the blueprint. I did a research project when I started with customer experience, and I talked to the leaders of customer experience in many different companies, including Michael Baum actually. And what I found from talking to everyone is there are some very common things that people go through when they're starting a customer experience program. And so one of the first things is the reason why. There are times when there is a single catalyst, so a customer has given us very bad feedback. As a company, we need to respond to that. Sometimes we have found that it is more of a top-down mandate. So like the CEO has decided that customer experience is the current hot topic. It's the hot button. It's the in thing to talk about, and so then they want to have a program. But another big reason why people start a program in customer experience is to retain customers. And we'll talk about this a little bit later too, but customer retention is a really common goal of a customer experience program. And the next thing that people think about is, okay, so then what is our North Star? Now that I've decided to start, what am I going towards? And so one of the things we did at GitHub is we did this project where we put together our C-suite, and we gave them a bunch of questions to think through what is the experience that we want. How do we articulate that? And we sort of took that as a guiding principle of what we were trying to build. It was a lot around delightful experiences, streamlined, frictionless. Those are things that keep coming up over and over. And then the next step, of course, is going to be to think about gaps. How do we get to that North Star? Where are we today? And I'll talk a little bit about how we do that. And then how do we make an impact and what do we measure? So we'll talk a little bit about these things. But first, let's talk about frameworks. You'll see that there are at least, a million different frameworks out there. And they all have their, benefits and pros and cons, and they're all well thought out. And like Jonathan, they're useful to folks. What I want to say to y'all is, though, this is not necessary. You don't have to have a single framework and just really follow that. You just need some building blocks and make sure that you do those well. So here are the common building blocks that I have found to be most helpful in my career and my experience. Understanding the customer's journey is very important. Specifically, understanding where are they touching your company and your people, and which of those touch points are the most important ones. The voice of the customer is very important. Having a plan around understanding what our customers are saying to us, how are they feeling, is very important. Measurements, of course, we only improve what we measure, so measurements. And then Jonathan was talking about customer centricity. This is, in my experience, the hardest thing to really achieve well. But to me, customer centricity is where every single person in the company understands what the customer's experience is and feels empowered to influence that positively themselves. So I don't have to go to my C-suite or my boss's boss to make a decision. I feel empowered in my own job to do what is right to create that delightful experience. When we have achieved that in a company, then that is truly a customer-centric company. So action is bigger than strategy, and I'm going to say this over and over again. When we start a CX program, this C-suite comes to us and says, "What's your strategy? How are you going to get things done?" I'm here to say that you don't need to have a strategy necessarily to have a really good action plan. And what really matters is doing stuff, getting stuff done. So with customer journey maps, they have a tendency of being shelfware. They have a tendency of being too high level. So here's a journey map for my company. My position is that is a completely useless customer journey map. Or they could become very complicated and large. So what has worked in my experience is to narrow the focus. So we've done it a few times now, so I'll give you an example with GitHub. We chose to do the first journey map for one segment, which was our enterprise customers. We chose one persona in that segment, which was our admin. So these are the people who are setting up the GitHub instance and inviting people to the repositories, etc. We chose to do it for one product, which is our GitHub Enterprise product. And we chose to do it for one stage of the customer journey, which is just when the signature from like post-contract to implementation. What that did was it gave us a customer journey map that was very targeted, and we were able to get a lot of details about what are the moments that matter. We were able to get what the pain points are. And you know this already as CX professionals, the moment those moments that matter match up with the pain points, you know where your action plan is. That is the place to start. That is the best place to start when you know that your moment that matters to your customer is already a pain point. And so another example from work we're doing right now, we're doing a customer journey map for our smallest customers at Stripe. And once again, we chose a segment, you'll notice, startup SMB. We chose a product, our payments product. Stripe has many different products, but we've chosen payments. And we chose a persona. We chose the developer who actually is integrating Stripe into the systems versus an economic buyer or a different persona. And that, again, is giving us, of maybe 30 touch points, 5 are the most important. And those 5 then give us a plan of action to go change. So again, my recommendation for customer journey maps, they're very important, super useful, but only when they're narrow and targeted and can be something that can then be actioned upon. Okay, so voice of customer. I put 10 random things on the side because you can do any of this is voice of customer, right? Any and all of these, whether it's interviews, chats, social media, phone calls, surveys. I walk up to the front desk and yell at the receptionist. It's all the voice of the customer. And this is another place where quality is more important than quantity, and action is more important than strategy. So you'll notice when Michael was talking, it wasn't so much that they kept getting voice of customer from 50 different points of contact. It was more that they had a plan around a certain piece and then they did some action around it. So you can get structured data, unstructured data, but again, my point is that feedback is a gift. What are we doing about it, right? So one example from my GitHub days is we wanted to improve the support CSAT. So in order to do that, we did a bunch of research, talking to customers, talking to the support people. We put together a customer journey map of, what does the support journey look like? So only when they're coming to support. And we incorporated the sentiment from the customers. So we started looking at the chat transcripts and the phone call transcripts and assigning scores of what is that sentiment in that call so that we have an idea of where the sentiments are going. And then we did, text analysis to see when the sentiment was negative, what was the conversation about? And that then gave us, again, an action plan. Oh, the customers get really upset when their account's locked out. This was a very common problem back at GitHub because when an account's locked out, you can't do work. And so it's a moment that matters because I can't work, and it was a pain point. And so voice of customer in that case was what helped us to get to that pain point, to be able to figure out, okay, so this is what I need to solve for first. So that's another way, voice of customer can help get us to that point of improving the experience. So measurements and KPIs is the other pillar that I think is very important in your strategy, plan, framework, however you want to call it. If we're not measuring something, we're not improving it, so we should be measuring it. You'll see customer effort score. It's not always defined in the same way. Different companies will define their effort score, the questions they ask, the places where they ask those questions can all vary. But some examples of how to get to the effort, for example, would be in product where you're doing something. So let's say, GitHub example, somebody is creating a pull request, which is a way to submit your code to make a change. If there's a quick survey right there that says how easy was it to do, right? That gives you a sense of what is that effort score. Or let's say somebody's opening a support ticket for the first time, and you ask them, hey, how quickly did you find the portal? Or how long did it take you to get to the right answer? Like those kinds of things get us to the customer effort score. But it's an important metric in the world of customer experience that doesn't get talked about a lot, but is sort of very key in getting to that experience and the point of friction and removing those. But any and all of these are important. I have seen and I know of customer experience programs that measure many of these and some of these. So I think, again, quality is more important than quantity. You're an insights person. I'm sure you have a lot of these that come your way. But my advice and recommendation to all of you, my lived experience is, it doesn't matter how many of these you measure, as long as you're measuring them with a goal in mind and you have a plan, again, to figure out why you'd want to improve it, how you'd want to improve it, and then go do that to make that happen. Customer centricity. So I was talking about this a little bit in the beginning. This, to me, is the hardest thing to achieve, is customer centricity, because this, again, it is when the company has every single individual empowered and they understand what they can do personally to improve the customer's experience. That's when a company is customer centric. And that is a tall order. It means there's top-down mandates, like it's part of the values, for example. So Microsoft and GitHub share one value where we say customer obsession is a core company value, right? So it puts sort of that customer experience into the value proposition. At Stripe, we have a value that says users first. We call our customers users, like users of our product. So that's the first people that we are going to serve or help. So it starts from the top, and then ground up, how do we incentivize our team members to do the right thing? So in my team, in professional services, customer satisfaction has been a KPI for several quarters now. We have a bar we set for our customer satisfaction, and then we just want to make sure that we're either achieving or being better, overachieving on that metric every single quarter. So I think when top down meets up with bottoms up, and you do it well, then you've gotten a customer-centric company.
Yeah, so introducing Jonathan Shroyer here. He's like a partner, a colleague, a friend. We worked together a few years ago. We did a webinar on the ROI of customer experience. I think you guys are going to hopefully learn a lot from Jonathan. Obviously, he started something called Officium Labs, which was a think tank. I think it was was it 3 years ago?
Yeah, about 4 years ago.
4 years ago. And then a few years later, he managed to sell this. Well, I wouldn't even say managed to sell. Someone just came out with an offer, and now he's been incorporated into Arise Gaming. So I don't know if he's going to talk a bit about his journey there, maybe. But yeah, it's a real inspiration. So.
Well, thank you for the very kind introduction. We'll keep it casual, as I do like to keep it casual. Jonathan is one of the only CX brothers I have that I'll get up for 5 a.m. webinars for. So that's what he was talking about. But no, it was a great time. We had a good time connecting. And to be honest, it's been so interesting. It's been 2 or 3 years since I've gone out and done these types of things with COVID and a new child and so forth. I thought I'd start off with like a couple stories, if that's okay. They're a little personal, but they kind of relate to CX in a funny way. So when I was like maybe 13, my mother got married again. So she's on her second husband, or third husband, second stepdad. And I remember like they set these very firm rules, and they're like, there is no eating in the living room. And there was like 10 kids in my family, so there's like 10 of us. And I understood why they set the rules. Like logically, you don't want to have all this food mess in the living room. But I came in one day. And my stepdad, Jerry, he was eating in the living room. And so I sat down next to him, and I said, Dad, he's like, what? I was like, you're breaking the rules. He's like, what are you talking about? I was like, well, the rules are no eating in the living room. And he's like, well, those rules aren't for adults, because adults don't have to follow those rules. And I said, okay. So I went into the kitchen, and I got some food, and I sat down next to him, and I started to eat. He's like, why are you eating in the living room? You're breaking the rules. I was like, if you don't keep the rules, then I don't have to keep the rules. And that didn't end well for me at the time. I grew up in Texas, and corporal punishment was not against the law. But it kind of dovetails into like this other experience that I had with my son recently. He's just about to be 2 years old. And so I remember one day, my wife and I, we have like a schedule, and I was going to pick him up from the afternoon nap. And so, I wasn't always there for the afternoon nap because I usually did the mornings. And so I wasn't aware of the entire experience, if you want to put it that way, that happens. And so I went in and I was like, oh, he's up. I picked him up, and all of a sudden it was like the biggest temper tantrum I've ever heard in my life. And I was like, what is going on? I'm a bad dad or a bad papa. I'm like, what am I doing wrong? He never has, anyways. And so come to find out, like in the afternoon time, he likes to wake himself up slowly. He likes to go through a process. And no adult is supposed to come and pick him out of the crib until he's stood up and he's raised his arm up. So essentially, I impeded on his experience, and I got the reaction of what you might expect if you go into a room and you try to wake an adult up. And if they're taking it after your nap, they may be more polite, but you're going to get that type of reaction. And I highlight both of those things is because as a new parent and as a child, I didn't always think about the experience that we have in the home. And it really translates to customer experience and how we treat the people that we care about, our customers, and so forth. And so it just reminded me of those, the things that we learn day to day, like in the work that we do, is transferable, and conversely, the other way around too. And so I think the title of the thing I was going to talk about today is the ROI of customer experience, which I think is totally appropriate. So I had been working in the CS kind of experience field for a number of companies like Microsoft and Postmates and Symantec and other companies. And one of the things that frustrated me the most about it is that none of these companies seem to really care about their customers and the customer experience. They said they did, but when you got to their actions didn't necessarily focus on that. I remember in the late 90s and the early 2005s, 2010s, everybody was about costs, savings, right? It was about optimization, move things offshore, do this, do that. And then you get into 2005 to 2015, and there was like the early days of AI, but they're like, oh, we got to move stuff back because some stuff should be onshore and some stuff should be offshore because risk compliant, all these things, under the guise of customer experience. And then you kind of get into the 2015s, and you're starting to have these companies say, wait a minute, I'm spending more money to acquire a customer than I am to keep a customer. And I'll make more money if I keep a customer versus acquiring a new customer, because you know who your golden core hook customers are, and you don't know who always is coming in the door. And so you start to see this transformation. Of course, AI is coming in, and now everybody's like, hey, now I used to have an axe to do my AI work. Now I have a chainsaw with ChatGPT. At least that's one of my developer friends. He told me that. And so you're starting to see a lot of excitement around that. But what hasn't changed in the entire 20, 25 years is that customers are the heart of every company. They make or break a company, right? Whether a company succeeds or fails is based off of the customers. I love the developer persona because that's the keystone of the buying experience. And a lot, the CEOs are like, no, we need to take care of this part. And you're like, well, actually, if we don't take care of the keystone, these people don't exist. And so I love that you focus on personas and you're very acute in the work that you're doing at Stripe. And I really love that kind of approach. The other thing that I thought was really cool about your presentation is when you simplify it down, like the 4 key areas, you talked about data. And one of the things that I've learned in my experience is data is the foundation of what lets you do all those other things to get a CX seat at the table and so forth. So anyways, I digress. So 20 years in, and it's so really frustrated, and I was like, I'm just going to start my own company. Because I just want to do it the right way. I'm just tired of getting subpar, experiences from BPOs or perfect consultancies, and I'm also tired of executives not listening. And so I invented a method, a framework, which I laughed when you said, "There's lots of frameworks." I was like, "Great, mine's not out there. That's good. That's good." But I invented a framework, and the idea of the framework was really to help CX leaders or CS leaders think how to change the language of the conversation that they talk to the power cores of the company, the decision makers, like how do you get CX at the table? And so I invented that. And so I was like, well, I'll start it out. And we started off as a CX think tank with this idea that we could help companies transform. And essentially, we have a lab in San Mateo. And one of the premises of our lab is, come and ask simple questions to build the future of innovation of CX, right? And so I said, well, let's got my founding team together, and I said, what's the one question that we want to answer? And so I was like, well, we kind of talked about it, and we're like, well, let's just answer, how do you create customer experience as a profit center? And that was the question. And so that's when we invented this kind of framework. And so we started talking to customers, and we're like, hey, we want to help you change the language that you're talking with your kind of key decision makers or your power cores, so that they'll invest more, so that you'll get a seat at the table. And so we had a number of early customers. Warner Brothers happened to be one of them, and which was helpful for us as a startup. They're a great client and still are. And so we really started for the first 6 months of developing this, testing this out. If any of you have founded a company, you're like, hey, sometimes you got to test it out, figure out what works, what doesn't work, and so forth. So that was Officium Labs. And so we started that out, and then 6 months in, the pandemic hit. And we were already remote, so that wasn't, because the premise of our company was a global network of really talented human capital and technologies plugged in to help companies thrive and get bi-directional value. And so, but it did cause us to okay, well, if we're going to maintain as a company, we have to pivot a little bit. And we had a lot of our clients asking us about, do you do frontline stuff like customer service? We were in gaming a lot, so game testing, community moderation, those types of things. And so we pivoted a bit, and then we started to kind of take the thinking and the consultative work that we had to build a frontline services team in a new and different way that maybe it's done, because it wasn't all about, hey, how can I make money on this transaction? It was about, hey, how can I deliver value back to our clients that then delivers value back to their users or their end user customers and so forth. So that's kind of where we started, and that's where the journey of Officium Labs started, but it kind of started in that general area. So we started Officium Labs out, and so I created a 9-pillar CX framework. And so the idea was, I thought of it from a product point of view. I said a lot of times I see services companies that are very services focused, and they're not thinking about it from their buyer's point of view, which is a product. And so each of the pillars, there's features, and each of the pillars, so like workforce management is a pillar, operations is a pillar, automation is a pillar, community is a pillar, as examples, right? And so then I thought, okay, well, what are the 20 features in each of these pillars that either exist today or should exist? And then I categorize these features based off of basic, which when I started, basic wasn't a bad word, but but basic, standard, premier, and then best in class. And the thesis was that if you delivered all of the features in the best in class framework, then you would be able to prove profitability, revenue protection, or revenue attribution. That was the thesis that we started with. And so that's what we started with the CX think tank. So when we started the business, we went and we did these CX, we used to call them service stack audits, but now they're called maturity model audits. And so then what we do is we audit an organization, and we'd let them know where were they in the service stack maturity model. Were they basic? Were they all the way up to best in class? And then we would help them with a workshop to build, like, what does that transformation look like to help them get there? Right. With their internal staff, using consultancy, whatever, but what are the things that they need to do? And then we put them through this very fun game. Well, it's fun in the sense that the outcome was fun, and it's because a lot of times people struggle prioritizing. Human beings struggle. They're like, "Hey, I need to do these 20 things so that I can win." And then you can't do 20 things in a year, right? And so what I did is I set up this game in a way where I rigged an economy where they would come up with their final 16 initiatives, right? Throughout the workshop, we'd put them on the table and they'd t-shirt size them on cost and then impact. And then time. So based off of the cost, I would tabulate all of the costs of all the initiatives, and let's say it was $100, just to keep it simple. Or I would set up the economy to where you could only buy $20 worth of the initiatives. And then each person would only get $1 or $2. And so you could buy maybe one initiative on your own, but you'd be forced to collaborate to say, okay, these are going to be the 5 or 6 initiatives that we're invested in, that we're aligned around, that we know leadership is 80% going to buy in. They're always going to do 1 or 2 things, right? But 80% is going to buy into that. So that's how we started.
So let me play that back, just to make sure I understand. You basically created a workshop or an activity that was gamified in order to get folks to focus on the most effective CX improvements. Is that
to drive profitability,
meaning ROI?
Yeah, that's right. And that's how we started off with the ROI of customer experience. Okay. So that's how we started. And then as we expanded the business, what we found out is not only customers asked us to help them with frontline stuff, but they're like, hey, like we figured out that in some of those pillars, some of those features were not effective with the current BPO landscape because their incentive models were misaligned. So we're like, well, let's align, when we do frontline services, let's align our incentive models to that of the client's focus areas, so then they could more quickly get to that ROI of CX, if that makes sense. So, and then in game, we do other things, but in gaming specifically, the services includes player support, so customer service, right? Game testing, localization, and then community and moderation, right? So, just to give, is that helpful? Yeah. So that's kind of how the business started and how we started to think about things, right? And what was interesting is, I was telling Jonathan, I was like, in year one, let's say in year one we made $1, just to keep it simple. Where the people were so interested kind of in this approach that in year two we made $20, right? They were just so and it made sense to me because I had been doing it for 20 years and I was like, hey, but I didn't know if it was going to make sense to the market, and so they were so interested in that, and so we captured a lot of people's imagination, and what it allowed us to do is also to sanity check the model, and we had some learnings from the model, right? A couple learnings, or big companies loved the model. They thought it was great because then it helped them to really think through, like, well, how do I transform, but how do I talk to the power cores in a language that they understand, ROI, right? And then we based off of the industry, we're like, hey, well, this is the percent, and this was the measurement that really helped with the language translation for power cores, this is the percent that a best-in-class services organization invests in customer experience against their revenue. And these are the features that you invest in to get to that, to prove ROI, right? And so that was a very simplistic conversation that a CEO or a CMO or whatever could understand. And
I have a question.
yeah, go ahead. Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
I was thinking about how translatable that is across sectors. Was it pretty?
Completely translatable.
Okay.
Every sector, I mean, we're not in every sector, but every sector that we put it in. And the reason why it's translatable, and you guys will already know this, but the reason why it's translatable is because the core to the model is a point that you had made, which is data. And so in 2015, 2016, people weren't using single identifiers as much as they should be. They're using it much more now. But if you have the single identifier, and you attach that single identifier to the CRM and to your database structure, whatever it is, it doesn't matter, the product database, you put them together, then it allows you to amplify the impact of the model, because then you can immediately say, hey, I can experiment with the features in this framework, or really any framework, the features in this framework, and I can do A/B tests to prove out profitability, to prove out revenue protection, and then I can show based off of those experiments how we should expand and invest in those areas, because then you talk to the CFOs and the CMOs, and they're like, oh yeah, that makes sense. You can go get us 10x protection, you can go get us 5x revenue attribution, and so forth with that. Yeah.
So my question's around your benchmark data.
Yeah.
How did you all come about, or how did you find those benchmarking data?
So we did a couple of things. So the first thing that we did was we started benchmarking just the customers that we had.
Okay.
And then we obviously, there's thousands and thousands of companies, right? So we can't service everybody. Either A, they're not interested, or B, not time, budget, whatever. And so what we started to do is we started to look at industry data that was similar to our model. So it was less important about was all of the features in industry data, and it was more important were the key tenets of what we were trying to accomplish in industry data. And there's just an mass amount of CX industry data out there. And so we collated all of that information, and then we based it off of sector, and then we said, okay, there are similar models here, like what does it look like at that level? And then, so then we were able to find out in each sector what companies we felt we're already best in class based off of those central themes and tenets. What companies we thought we weren't, and the way that we sanity checked that is we did what do they call them, hidden shoppers. We secret shopped, and we would so we would get a group of our network, and we get 1,000 people, and we'd say, okay, let's secret shop these 20 companies in this sector, and improve it out through the ticket experience, right? And through that overall experience that we got. It's not 100% data proof, right? But it gives us a lot. It helps validate the assumptions that we're getting from these benchmarks.
So that's how then you decided what was best in class, based on people's...
That's how we benchmark which companies were best in class. And then we validated if the features in our model stood up to these other industries, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. Let's say that you're a CEO, and I'm the CX leader, and I'm talking to you. Generally, you carry about shareholder value. Let's say you're public, just to keep it simple. Shareholder value, earnings per share, and quarterly revenue targets, and then maybe you care about your people, maybe in the other area. Depends what kind of CEO you are, right? But retention of people, right? So, but you care about lots of those things. And if you're a product CEO, maybe you care really a lot about the product and the roadmap, right? So those 5 things, what you don't think about on a daily basis is what impact is customer experience having on those things, right? So you have to use language when you're talking to a CEO to say, hey, I can increase your earnings per share. I can increase your client retention. I can increase your shareholder value, and this is how I can do it, right? So you have to use that type of a language for that person, for CEO, for CFO, even for even a CMO. Like, hey, yes, you should take some of those marketing acquisition dollars. You should put them in customer experience and customer service, because I can outperform the $10 that you're going to spend in marketing. I can outperform, and let me show you how I can outperform. And it's not a you against me, but it's like, hey, let's outperform together. So you have to be very intentional about the language that you use. Otherwise, people will not care. And then when you talk, like when I talk to the team, like my founding team, or even when you talk to mid-level managers at some of the companies I work with, use completely different language. Like, you're like, hey, I'm your ambassador to help the things that you've been wanting to do because every mid-management leader, it's not like I have great ideas. They all have these ideas, but they haven't been able to get the platform, right? Let me help you get that platform. Let's co-create this together. This isn't about me and Officium or Arise. It's about how do I help you tell your story. And so it's just about helping them as well. Experimentation is the key. So hey, you got $100. I don't need 10. Give me 5. Let me do a 6-month pilot, right? We'll do an A/B test. You use $5 for however you use $5. What's your metrics of success? Let's say it's conversion rate in the funnel. We'll say that's the metric. What's your normal percentage rate? Okay, 5%. And then what's your day 28 cohort? You know, your 1-year cohort, all that. Okay, great. So I know that, you know, for that $5 in the next year, you're going to deliver, we'll say $15. If they're not delivering 3x on their investment, then they're not really a great CMO. That's not a diss, but just an accurate, factual based name. So, okay, that's that $5. Okay. With my $5, this is the experiment that I'm going to run. I'm going to do A, B, C, right? And the way that we're going to track the success of my experience is we're going to look at what were these clients doing before the experiment, what were they doing during the experiment, and we're going to classify that as the test group against marketing. Now we're going to have a control group of clients that we don't do this stuff for. Same persona, same demographic, same all that stuff. And then what we're going to prove or not prove is whether I can out-deliver what you're doing, giving the same amount, so 3x or 6x return. And if I can do between 3 and 6x return, will you commit to fund a full-scale pilot, which would mean you would give me $10 or $15? And usually the answer is like, yeah, okay, here's $5, good luck, I'm friends with your boss, whatever, And so then what you got to do is but you have to be very thoughtful about the features that you do in the experiment. And then you do the experiment and you got to have the data, you got to have the weekly reports, you got to have the monthly reports so they can track progress, so they can say, oh, I told you so, or you can say, actually, we're making progress. This is what we're doing. This is what we're learning. This is what we're seeing, and so forth. And usually by the end of that, I've never had an experiment that didn't outperform marketing. Doesn't mean it wouldn't happen, but I've never had it happen. And that's because you've got these customers who ostensibly love you because they bought your product. Yeah. They're still with you after a certain number of years, so there's a certain persona type. And similarly, you've targeted the developers on purpose. You target a certain persona that you know that you could monetize and retain better, right, to start. And so then you do that experiment, and you're like, okay, I've outperformed you, let me scale. But what you learn in that experiment is a ton more than just this getting money. It's like, hey, A, we can do experiments and be successful, which a lot of CX teams don't do. B, it's like, oh, actually, we know how to deliver better value proposition than the company thought we could. So now CX moves from this seat to the boardroom table, ostensibly, or at least the leadership table, right? And then C, you start to create this culture of innovation that maybe doesn't exist in the team because the team didn't feel like they would ever be able to do anything because they're already told, no, we don't have a budget for that. No, we don't have a budget. But all of a sudden, it's like the Nelson Mandela, I never lose, I only win or learn, right? So it's this iteration, and you start to build that culture, which I think is really important in CX teams. If you don't know Arise, even before we joined Arise, it's essentially a platform where 75,000 workers globally can go and find CX work on a daily basis. These are folks that don't want to work for a company full time. They want to have flexibility in their schedule. They want to work for multiple brands and so forth. So it's a platform that enables that, right? It was the same vision I had for Officium, right? But Arise wasn't as well known to me when I started Officium. And so sometimes great ideas start in parallel. And so there's similar visions of helping to decentralize work, but also to decentralize wealth. Because when you give people opportunities to live where they want to live and then work where they want to work, then you automatically move money from tech hubs to tier 2 to tier 3 cities and so forth. I grew up in a small city in Texas with 3,000 to 4,000 people. And so it was very meaningful to me, like to give people opportunities where they didn't have to move to the big cities and so forth. So like there was a visionary alignment component. So yeah, and now we're like a year and a half. And the consultancy stuff still goes. It's been super successful, kind of expanded across other verticals because Arise has a ton of other verticals: healthcare, finance, hospitality, and so forth. And then the gaming side has grown. I think I looked at the numbers today. It's grown like 10x since the acquisition. Because again, our focus is profitability for the client who wants profitability for the end user or a better experience for the end user, all right? And so we just continue that focus. I'm an evangelist for CX, and it's just something I'm passionate about.